So again, the topic is second wind, and we're going to start with a reflection. So I invite you to, hopefully you are seated comfortably, but if not, please do take a moment to make sure you're physically comfortable. And to help us in that way, you can take a nice gentle breath in. And as the air is slowly released, feeling the body relax. And again, another deep breath in. And the slow release of the air, supporting the body in letting go of any tension. And breath is so interesting. For the physical body, being able to catch one's breath is so vital. Oxygen is so vital to life. And sometimes when we feel that we're running out of steam physically, we need to stop, catch our breath, and it gives us an injection of energy, a second wind. What does that look like spiritually? When we're faced with challenges, even anxiety or uncertainty, it can start to drain our energy, weigh us down, sap our enthusiasm. What does it mean to infuse ourselves with the oxygen of enthusiasm? That second wind. Sometimes it just takes a moment like this, sitting quietly, being fully in the moment, and taking care of my mind, my inner world, stepping off the stage of day-to-day life into a quiet space internally. Where I can catch my breath, refocus, remember what matters. And that moment of returning to the essence can give me an injection of energy, melt away the heaviness, so I can face challenges creatively, find solutions. There's so much power in taking even a second to catch one's breath inside. Om Shanti. So warm welcome again. I feel like this is the festive edition of Inner Fitness. So this idea of second wind is so fascinating physically. And so we're going to invite you, again, you may not wish to say anything, you can chat, but at least to reflect, starting with just the physical example in physical or athletic pursuits. We can bring into our mind the marathon runner who's running and I think really close to the end, but the energy level can go so low. And then suddenly it's as if they get a second wind, they get a burst of energy and start to sprint towards the finish line. So thinking for yourself, what goes on inside physically when someone gets that injection? They've been, really going for a while, and somehow out of somewhere magically, they get this burst of energy that's really unexplainable. Just to reflect what's going on inside. And is it something that's happening physically, or is there something that happens in the mind that then affects the physical? So, what's going on inside? Just taking a moment to reflect what kind of thoughts, attitudes can create that injection of energy that even manifests on the physical level. And so, again, if you want to share, you can do so through chat, or you can unmute yourselves, whatever you're comfortable with. Again, knowing that we are recording, but is there anything you want to share in terms of what you think souls are thinking or feeling inside, such that they get this second burst of energy despite being perhaps quite physically drained? Hope of positive outcome. Beautiful. Great. So something that happens in the mind, the hope of a positive outcome. Any other thoughts?
Well, I've run a marathon.
Oh, sorry. I just want to make sure I can hear you. Go ahead, NJ.
Okay, I run a marathon, and um, so I know that feeling of, I just can't take one more step, and then boom, you're able to sprint home.
Right.
Um, and it's something like, it's just not a mental thing of knowing that you can do it. It feels like your spirit kicks in and you become limitless.
Mm,
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you. It's interesting that you share, NJ, because when I first came into this spiritual practice, I interviewed a lot, I would say informal. There was nothing formal or official about this, but I talked to, because of being in fitness environments, I had a lot of marathon runners around me. I don't run marathons, but I had a lot around me. And they intrigued me, and I would ask them because there was such a mental thing going on in there, something special, as you say, even spiritual. And I would ask them, when you're, these kinds of questions of how do you override? How do you keep going? And almost all of them would actually use the word, yeah, there's something spiritual and almost a bit out of body, if you will, going on that enables them to do these really remarkable physical feats. So it's really interesting what you shared. And even on a limited level, it's quite interesting in a fitness class. I've experienced it and I've seen it while instructing a class. They'll be going for a very long interval, doing burpees or whatever, push-ups or whatever, forever, it seems. And then you just say those magic words, just 8 more counts. You'd have just 8 more. I'm going to count you down. And there'll be like this weird surge of energy, like out of nowhere. knowing that there is that finish line in sight. So something's going on inside, and it is connected to outcome, that sense that there will be a positive outcome. I will make it. Really important. Now, behind me here is a picture. This is one of my favorite pictures. These are some of the senior students in this organization. And believe it or not, almost all of them have passed away. This one, Daddy Gulzar, at the very, very front corner here, my finger's not doing well. This one right here is the current administrative head of the organization. And before her was Daddy Genki, who actually passed away during this pandemic. And before her were these two, Daddy G and Didi Manmohini. So this is these are, I call them spiritual giants, a pretty powerful group of souls. And I always found them fascinating because they kept their enthusiasm. To me, they're like spiritual marathon runners. They kept their enthusiasm they had so many second winds, their enthusiasm at such a high level because the obstacles that they had to face and the sustenance they had to provide, it was constantly at such a high level, and you had to wonder, where is that energy coming from? And I think they would probably respond. I certainly can't speak for them, but I think they would respond from a couple of places. Even the first student of this organization, Brahma Baba, which is where the name comes from for the organization, he started this practice at the age of 65 when you're really going into retirement. And, you're kind of winding things down. You're not winding things up, you're winding things down. And, starting, and at the age of 60, he's actually going to really talk about a second wind. It's like a second life, that what he's going to have to really do to get the organization started and to sustain it. Absolutely remarkable. So what's going on inside of those souls? And the reason this topic touched me is because I started to feel that, we've had this situation, this global situation, and it felt like souls are getting a little bit tired. And then, there's this news of possibly a second wave, and then souls get really tired. It's sort of like you run a marathon and then you're told, okay, now you got to run another one. And so rather than a second wave, I was thinking a lot about a second wind. And yes, I know many have their sights on the vaccine, but again, whether it's this, maybe some other challenge might come along. So how to keep the self really in a light and enthusiastic place in the face of, opposing forces, if you will, however long that's going on for. And what's that capacity, that second wind, that to be able to re-energize the self. And so when I look at these souls and Brahma Baba, marathon runners, it seems that there's a couple of things going on. Okay, maybe three. First off, their training. They have a practice that will give them a baseline level of fitness, whether we're talking physical or spiritual. They have a practice. There's diet, physical regime, sleep, hydration, various practices that keep them at a baseline level of well-being. And that's the same in spirituality. We have some daily practices that keep our fitness level spiritually at a really good level. And those daily practices are so important. We always say, well, if at least once every day, be able to give yourself just a little bit of time out, a moment of reflection, where you kind of step out of the whirling of day-to-day life and into a very quiet sanctuary inside of the self, and just kind of refresh the self. that happening at least once a day is super important. You know, we don't really think physically of, okay, I won't feed the body today. I'll skip the meal unless we're in some strange regime. You know, we always think I will sustain the body today. And even more important is that spiritual sustenance. I will give myself spiritual care every day. So that's really important to have a program of some sort so that at least there's a minimum level of rigor, if you will, of well being. So that's one thing I really noticed, that all of these souls, you know, for so many years, kept so committed to the daily schedule. We were told that, you know, obviously as their bodies aged, it was physically difficult to be able to do the things, but you would always see them. One of the practices is early morning meditation. You would see them just sort of, even just if they had to sit up in bed, but they'd be there, Daddy Janky at 103 years old, sitting up in bed, because they knew the daily practices were fueling their energy, keeping them at a certain level of spiritual well-being. So that's one thing, is to check for the self. Do I have a practice in place? You know, we have these different types of well-being. There's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And ironically, the one that's most invisible, the spiritual, deeply affects the others. So if I take care of that deep, invisible level of well-being, it will ripple through to the others. So do I have a program in place that will help me, quite a regular program? So that's important, the training. But the second thing that they had was, yeah, as you said, that, you know, whether it's 8 more counts or the finish line's there or positive outcome, is they had something called faith. They were absolutely certain, 100% certain, that they would be successful in this endeavor. And from what I've seen, they've not just been successful, they've blasted through the finish line and gone on to many other successes. There's a beautiful story of Daddy G. You know, I just find these stories remarkable. There's so many, but there was one where they were just starting to establish the presence of the Brahma Kumaris in New York City. And, you know, so many new things to have to understand and work with, being in a completely different culture, different language. So there were souls there who were trying to establish, but Daddy Ji and a team of other senior students came over for a visit. And of course, they took them on a tour of New York City. And one place they went to was the United Nations. And Daddy G stood and saw all the flags of all the different countries. And the one thing, well, there were many beautiful things, but one of them about Daddy G was she, in her heart, felt so deeply that every single soul should experience spiritual well-being, that self-respect, that personal dignity. It's nothing to do with what ethnicity or language or religion. It's a right of every soul, personal dignity. So when she saw all those flags, she felt, this is a very important place for us to be present because all the souls of the world meet here. I mean, this was crazy, crazy, you know, but again, she just had so much, you know, tireless. She always thought big and very energized. And because she was so loving, souls were so inspired, and that deep love and cooperation would come. And so very soon after, it's amazing what happened. They did start, you know, they got a little office, they went through all the procedures, and were eventually, you know, developed a very beautiful relationship with the United Nations. I think that also the Secretary General of the UN would come and visit. So it was a very beautiful relationship that grew, but it was the energy of that seed. And my feeling is that Daddy G felt this will happen. The timing, everything, the details, I don't need to worry too much about that. This will happen because it was based on such a pure feeling. So this idea of having this deep faith that when there is truth or pure feelings shaping my objectives, it's going to happen. How it will happen, when it will happen, don't need to worry about that. But if it's a pure feeling filled with lots of truth, lots of benevolent feelings, it will happen. And I've seen this so often, just these crazy, crazy ideas that especially these original students had, but it was so fixed in their mind because the intention was so pure. It was so fixed in their mind, this will happen. And so they kept having the energy to be able to sustain and follow through on these ideas, because very often we'll have an idea and inevitably, especially if the idea is about change, one will come up against obstacles and challenges. It's a given. It will happen. And at that point, our energy starts to dip and we start to wane, and you never really saw that. In fact, again, about Daddy G, they used to say, they'd have a program for 10,000 in India, which is not a big number for 10,000 in India, and that's feeding them all and accommodating them all. And then after the program is over, Daddy G's so enthusiastic, and she's, they all look at her and say, okay, what next? And she says, 100,000. Again, it wasn't about numbers or show, but that very pure feeling that souls need to get access to the resources that will nurture their personal dignity. This is a right of every human being. This is why the Brahma Kumaris don't charge for their programs, is because it's a right. Personal dignity belongs to you. Inner peace belongs to you. Self-respect belongs to you. How can I sell to you something that belongs to you? I can't. And so many wonder, how does this organization keep going? They never charge for anything. And they just keep getting more and more second wins. They just keep going. And again, it's that deep sense that if it's based on a very pure feeling, it will be successful. A bit like truth will prevail. And that gives a lot. Once there's that faith, we use the term victory is guaranteed. If there's that faith, it's amazing how even when there's lots of challenges, if I still have that faith, but no, I will be successful. It's amazing how that attitude of deep, deep self-belief can really energize the self. So that was the second thing that they had, is a lot of deep belief in themselves and the power of pure intentions. And the third, their secret weapon. There is a story, there's many interesting stories, but there's an episode in the oldest scripture, really, the Gita, which is part of something called the Mahabharata. And in the Mahabharata, it's the classic plot on which all plots are based. Good prevailing over not so good. And so we have these 5 brothers who rightfully should be ruling the kingdom, but through some deceptions and illusions, and they somehow find themselves exiled from the kingdom that is rightfully theirs. And so constantly trying to return, and they belong to something called the warrior clan. And when we say warrior clan, we don't mean violent. We mean those who protect and honor what is true, right, pure, and good. In fact, their name, Pandavas, Pandava clan, means just, fair, good. So here they are fighting for good, and there's just 5 of them, maybe a dog. So 5 of them and a dog, and they're up against their cousins who just don't play fair. And there's hundreds of their cousins, hundreds of them. So this is a very lopsided match. And it's even more lopsided because the cousins are going to resort to all sorts of trickery and deception. So, and the Pandavas are so trusting and innocent. So it's really not a fair match at all. But both sides, both the Pandavas, these 5 brothers, and their cousins, the Kauravas, they have the same friend. And that friend's name is Krishna. Are you coming? Oh, we can see your hat. That friend's name is Krishna. And Krishna's really, just supports everyone. He is a friend of all. And so Krishna knows that this battle is about to happen. And so he goes to the Kauravas and say, I am your friend. You tell me whatever resources you would like to have as you go into this battle, and I will provide it. And they say, we want all of the biggest armaments you've got. Just give us all the big guns, just big stuff to fight with. And so Krishna says, okay, here you go. And of course, this is obviously an allegory for what we do often see going on in the world. We cry out to God, give us this, that, and the other thing. And then he goes to the other brothers, the Pandavas, and says, I know you're going into battle. What would you like from me? What would you like me to provide? I have given to their cousins. What would you like? And they say, well, we want you. We want you on our side. Krishna says, okay. Right. Now they didn't ask for armaments. They didn't ask for violence, nothing. They asked for just this one being. And of course, this one being, Krishna, represents the divine, the all-knowing one, God. That's all they asked for. And I know that these souls, part of what makes them spiritual giants is that they developed very meaningful, powerful, and personal relationships with God. And they really felt God was on their side. God's on the side of humanity. God is on the side of what is humane. And so since they were fighting a battle to restore what is humane in humanity, the greatness of the human spirit, God was on their side. And I don't know how many times personally, or I've seen large scale in this organization, incredibly great obstacles. Absolutely no physical resources whatsoever. This should not work at all. And that would, again, the energy would go down, but these souls just would get a second wind, a third wind, a fourth wind, would stay so enthusiastic, so energized, despite remarkable obstacles. Because of these 3 aspects, their commitment to a regular schedule of spiritual training, really important. Their deep faith in themselves and the power of pure intentions, and this remarkable relationship with God. Those 3 things. So when I hear marathon runners talk about something spiritual going on, these 3 things are a powerhouse. So whenever I feel because what makes our energy go down is actually nothing outside. We have incredible capacities. We have incredible capacities physically, but it doesn't even touch the capacities we have as spiritual beings. In fact, you often see in the fitness world, you see the willpower of the human spirit. What did I see the other day? Something like an 8-year-old Olympic lifting a ridiculous amount of weight that most adults cannot lift. And I'm looking at them going, wow. Like their little body should physically not be able to do this. And their technique was actually excellent. But I'm thinking, wow, I'm watching the will of that soul lift that thing. It's incredible. Our powers, our spiritual power, spiritual beings, and we don't even scratch the surface. We get upset over the smallest thing, and we have this incredible power inside of us that's untapped. And so we are capable of remarkable things. And I remember once someone sharing that, really anyone can achieve so much. The only obstacle they really face is themselves. It's nothing outside. We think our way into really hopeless states, unenthusiastic states, losing faith states. We think our way, it's our own thoughts. We think it's logical, right? We look at a situation and we say, oh, it's obvious this isn't going to work out. I mean, there's this problem, there's that problem, there's this problem, there's that problem. We get very problem conscious. And that drains our energy. Even as you sit here now, you can experiment when you start to have certain kinds of thoughts. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure everything's going to be okay. I'm really worried about the most, I looked out the window and saw it was snowing again. And I'm like, you have no idea how many times I've gotten stuck in the snow with a car. I'm like, oh no, I'm going to get stuck again. And then no one's going to be around to help me. And I'll be there forever. It'll be horrible. And, already I'm like, oh, it's like, no. I figured out some things. I know what I'm doing now. It's going to be fine. I've got a phone. So we can think ourselves into all sorts of interesting states because our thoughts create feelings. It's actually not what's going on that brings us down or drains our energy or takes the wind out of our sails. It's how we think about what's going on. And the more that we develop that, we call it pure energy, but that deep faith in the self, we actually start to think differently. I've met people like this who have a very pure attitude, very innocent and sweet. And whenever they're in a situation, they immediately start to recognize solutions. Like they're completely unstoppable. Their sails are always full of wind. They're always sailing along because they're constantly thinking about things in such a positive, pure way. And so I could use my thoughts to dive and sort of lose all energy. But I can also energize myself with the power of my thoughts. And obviously the thoughts have to be genuine. So it's coming from a deeper place than the thoughts. It's coming from a deep belief, an attitude, an awareness, a perspective, which brings us full circle to our spiritual training. What is that spiritual training about? What do we do when we meditate? And I know for so long, meditation has been connected to emptying the mind of thoughts or kind of zoning out or going to a very, very peaceful experience, which is great. But that actually isn't necessarily going to help me when faced with challenges. We say, I need to be accumulating something powerful when I'm in meditation, not just peaceful, but powerful. In fact, powerful thoughts take us to a very unique experience of peace or silence, very different from no thoughts, which is often what people connect meditation to, is I'm going to just have no thoughts, or I'll focus on a mantra and that will distract me from all other thoughts. And although it gives us a lot of relief, a reprieve, from the usual thoughts, there isn't that accumulation of power. So there's very specific thoughts that will enable us to accumulate power. It will take us into a very beautiful state, very peaceful state, but also a very powerful place, so that I'm actually training and developing spiritual strength. And these thoughts, we call them pure thoughts, thoughts based on truth, thoughts based on what is eternal. So we're not emptying our mind of thoughts in meditation. We're changing the quality of thoughts, what we think about, and thoughts that actually are like training the soul, giving strength to the soul. And it takes a while for us to get into that groove because we've been using our mind for so long to have other thoughts. So it's understandable that I think there's only two options. Either I'm always going to have those same ordinary thoughts I've been having, or I'm going to have to just have no thoughts. Completely escape all thoughts whatsoever. And it takes us a while to use our mind, but to have different quality of thoughts. And one thing I compare it to is when someone is doing fitness training and they're trying to learn to do a movement with different mechanics. So, for example, if I asked you to lift your arm, there's certain muscles that make that happen. And sometimes when we do movements due to injuries or whatever the case may be, weaknesses, imbalances, we start to use other muscles to make a movement happen. And that becomes a deep habit. And so when we try to do movement correction, it gets really tricky, because now every time I go to lift the arm or to walk or to jump, I'm slipping into that old habit. And so the feeling is, well, I can't do that movement without slipping into the old habit, so I won't do the movement at all. That's kind of what happens. And so it takes incredible interest and attention and care to learn how to do a movement with different mechanics. The old mechanics keep wanting to assert themselves. So that's on a very gross level with physical movement. Imagine how interesting that gets on a subtle level with our thoughts. Every time I go to think, I have the same thoughts. So I'll just stop thinking about it at all, because every time I think about it, it's the same thoughts. So this training that we do spiritually is super important. I am training my mind to have powerful thoughts. And this hasn't been our habit, thoughts based on what is true, pure, and eternal. So we do a lot of training so that when I'm in situations where I'm challenged, and the challenge is always coming from inside, I have this other capacity available to me. And this is where things get really interesting. We call them storms. So these thoughts come into the mind that are pulling the soul down. How can I get a second wind? It all depends on my spiritual training. You know, I know that, yeah, I'll watch an athlete suddenly be energized, but I also know that they've had incredible training. So that capacity is available for them. And their mind kicks in to unlock that capacity. I remember once watching a marathon race. It was an Olympic marathon race. It was very fascinating. And it was a women's marathon race. And the course was quite challenging, actually. And there was a point just before they re-enter the stadium where they had to go up this really interesting bridge that had a slow, very gradual, slow grade up. And then they were going to go down and enter the stadium. But this, you know, the commentators were aware of this challenge coming up. It was not a huge grade, but it was a slow, gradual incline. And the soul that was in front had been in front for a while, which is quite remarkable. And she had another runner sort of catching her drag right on her shoulder. And it was quite funny because the announcers were whispering, which was odd because no one, I mean, it's not like anyone could hear them. They weren't interrupting the runners. The runners can't hear them, but they were whispering because it was such a critical moment in the race. So these runners have been going for a while. Their training's phenomenal. So they're mentally strong and physically strong, but still, once you're on race day, it's exhausting. So it's near the end of the race. And the announcers are going, okay, this is the moment. She's got to find some energy because the only way she's going to lose that runner on her shoulder is if she does her push on this incline. If she can do that, she will win the race. And I remember, watching this. And for me, it was like the soul, the being inside of that machine was going to have to just be so focused, like the mental training, so focused and have just the right thoughts and will and faith to be able to make that kind of push at that stage in the race. The body could do it if the being, if she was able to provide that kind of spiritual support to the body. I remember watching it and wondering what would happen. It was so internal because, they were matched physically. And you could tell the racer knew that's what she had to do. And they came up to that bridge and the incline, and you just saw the soul just make a decision. Make a decision, commit, believe. All of her training was about this. Her coach had so much faith. This is a bit like God. Her coach had so much faith in her. And you just saw her kick and leave the other runner behind. And she went on to win the race. It was quite phenomenal to watch that second wind, quite phenomenal. It reminded me a lot about us and, times like we're in now, where you can tell souls are feeling drained because of their own thinking. They can blame it on situations outside if they want, but it's all our own thinking. And so I have to make an inner decision of what I'm going to do internally. Am I going to maintain that training, that spiritual training, have a practice that builds my capacity? Am I going to have that faith and belief in myself and that sense that things are going to be okay? I can get through anything. Yeah, things outside may keep changing and being interesting and who knows, but I can get through anything. I, the spiritual being. And yes, it's very helpful to explore that relationship with God. If you want to have someone powerful on your side, that's a really good choice. So, looking at the factors that will really support us at this time, and the good news is they're all internal. I don't have to wait for someone else. I don't need any external resources. It can all happen while I'm at home. So, yes, I can do this training at home, spiritual training, powerful reflection that includes really, really building up that sense of faith inside and exploring that relationship with God, very powerful being. So I'm going to end there because I want to leave time for reflection. And if there's anything you want to share about your own personal experience of how you re-energize yourself when the obstacles that seem to be outside, but they're actually coming up from within, if there's anything you want to share. It's very quiet out there. the one thing that, before we go into reflection, the one thing that can get us into a little bit of trouble, I think that's very useful, again, part of our spiritual training, is there's definitely the need to change the quality of thought, what we think about, but also to explore quantity of thought. When we start to think too much, we're giving much more room for de-energizing thoughts to enter. Daddy Genki used to say a lot, especially to those in Western countries, because we're very analytical and intellectual. And she used to say, don't think. And she didn't mean to empty your mind. That's not possible. And she knew that wasn't possible. That's not what she meant. If she was to finish the sentence, it would be, don't think the way you're currently thinking. Don't think as much as you're thinking. Don't worry. Change the quality of your thoughts. And very often, the word that we use in our meditation practice is not so much thinking as remembering. So the suggestion to switch from thinking to remembering. And that is the essence of our spiritual practice. So we will give that a try now as we finish up the session. And I'll take this moment to say happy holidays and happy new year. Yeah, Nora. Okay, there's a question coming. Second wind. Do you feel there's a difference between trying to talk your way into it, so at the level almost of just thoughts, versus something deeper? Yeah, which is why, you know, that feeling of where were those thoughts coming from, that deep, that deep switch in attitudes or consciousness. Because on one side, I could sit there and say, the joke we often have is that my mouth could be saying yes, but my head, yes, yes, yes. So, or the idea of an iceberg, that on the surface, I'm determined to go in this direction, but under the surface where most of the iceberg is, it's going in the other direction. So this is part that I feel of our spiritual training, is to go into deeper and deeper levels of supporting the self, of really, really, this depth that we want to, because we're used to, attitudes are so powerful. I can't begin to tell you, they're just, I'm sure you've experienced in your own life, that if I'm we say lip service, if I'm sort of saying, okay, but deep down inside, either I've experienced myself doing it, or I can experience someone else doing it. So they might be saying something, but you can pick up on the vibe that they don't really believe what they're saying. And this is why some of us make such bad salespeople, because on one level, you should buy this, but deep inside, I'm like, you know what? They've got a better deal down the block. So it's such a deep thing, like it has such deep power or impact as you go deeper at levels of functioning. The deepest level of functioning is consciousness, which creates attitudes, and that creates thoughts. So at the level of thoughts, I might be, but I'm not really convinced at the deeper levels, so it won't have as much power. So yeah, you really have to, again, I've been in such awe of people who you can tell they've got it at a very deep level. They're absolutely unstoppable, for better or worse, but they're unstoppable. And then I've seen people who are so, so many capacities, so many specialities, but they lack that one thing, which is belief in themselves, confidence. And so despite all of that, it's not that full expression of their specialities because of lacking that one thing. And it's not arrogance we're talking about, but just a deep belief, a real valuing of the self. It's very deep. That makes one very energized. So let's take a moment to see if we can follow in the footsteps of Brahma and these other seniors, what did they practice? What were they doing with their thoughts and attitudes? Sitting comfortably, eyes can be open if you want to experiment with that. I go inside, and at first, I'm looking from the inside out, through the windows of the eyes. And in that way, I become aware of what is eternal and what is temporary. Everything that I am looking out on, everything in the physical realm is temporary. Whatever I look at will eventually perish. And that includes this physical body. It all changes constantly. And then if I look the other way, inwards, really look at myself, I, the one that is thinking, reflecting, observing, not really experiencing myself in a physical way, but just this subtle activity that I'm engaged in, me, the experiencer. We say I, the soul. I am not physical. I am life. I am the living being. And so when I come into the physical, into this body comes to life. And if I was to leave this body, it would cease to function. I am spiritual, not physical. And I am eternal, indestructible. I do not perish. How powerful I, the soul, am. Completely indestructible, able to get through anything. Do I really understand who I am, what my capacities are as a spiritual being? How much I've relied on the outer world for peace, happiness, comfort, safety. So ironic, because nothing of the outer world is stable, imperishable. Instead, let me look within myself. Everything I seek, perhaps I can find within. That peace, that lightness, that calm, that love, that safety and security, all residing within the self. How I can energize myself simply by remembering that I am a soul and experiencing all the capacities within the self. That deep feeling, come what may, I will be fine. Om Shanti. We will end there, wishing you all a very happy new year. A reminder, we have a New Year's program this coming Thursday. So what we're going to do is actually explore through an interview. Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you, Angie. Explore through interview. We have a couple of guests joining us and have them share what they've learned from the last year from a spiritual perspective and how they're embracing the new year from a spiritual perspective. So I think it'll be a very interesting interview, and there'll be a little bit of song because they both happen to be singers. so you're welcome to join us. It's on our website, or you can email us for details. Other than that, we'll look forward to seeing you, if not before, in the new year. And we wish you all the best as this year ends and the new one begins. Thank you so much for joining.